Welcome to the Wayne Township Public Schools podcast, Referendum Series. In this special series, we will be your guide through the vital discussions shaping our community's strength for the future. We're committed to providing clarity and transparency through this podcast. Join us as we guide you through the upcoming March 12th referendum.
Welcome to our second podcast about the referendum. This is Mark Toback, Superintendent of Schools. I'm the host of this edition. Today, I'm joined by Bill Moffitt, who is our school business administrator. As you can imagine, with our business administrator as our guest, we're going to dig into the finances of the referendum. Welcome, Mr. Moffitt.
Thanks.
So let's get started. So, Mr. Moffitt, how is this proposal strategically timed, and what impact does that have on the financial part of the referendum?
Well, a few years back, the Board of Education had identified revising their long-range facility plan, which is a way to identify various projects that we have here in the district related to facility maintenance and repair. We went about identifying hundreds of projects in that process for the long-range facility plan. We reviewed them with our professionals as well as district staff and principals to identify the items that were specifically identified for a state aid program to provide debt service aid to the district. That was something that the board wanted to focus on, things that leveraged our dollars as we spend to maintain our various pieces of equipment and facility systems. So we consider that as an investment, and these investments are usually outside of our annual operating budget. Mostly what we do is we provide repair projects, smaller dollar amounts, but eventually you can't keep up, and what I call a mountain then forms, and you have to climb that mountain. So the board had identified these various projects that would qualify under this existing program of the state of New Jersey to really come up with about a little over 60 projects that we felt were eligible for financing. And that eventually turned into about $39 million as part of the referendum process. So what's good about it is we have one investment with Anthony Wayne Middle School that will be ending, and then another investment which will begin with the idea that the referendum passes.
So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on the long-range facility plan. So I know that is something that every school district has to have in New Jersey, but explain maybe a little bit more about how that's really important here.
What's important is it identified as a process. It's something the state of New Jersey requires, and we have to really take account of every facility maintenance and repair project on a massive document that we then submit to the Department of Education, which makes us eligible to be considered for financing through the state aid process or program. So it is a process where district officials, myself, the directors of facility, walk our facilities, discuss potential issues to identify with the architect, and then we fill it out and submit it to the Department of Education. And they refer back to that long-range facility plan when they review our applications, when we submitted them one by one, which is the 60 somewhat projects that we ultimately, out of hundreds, submitted to the department to support that $39 million figure that's currently part of the referendum consideration.
So we have really the 60 projects for the referendum. But as you mentioned, there are hundreds of other projects, and many of those projects are projects that we fund through our own budget, correct?
Correct. We provide not only in our operating budget small projects that maintain our facilities over time, but we also utilize what we have currently, which as capital reserve and maintenance reserve, which the district deposits funds into. So between our operating budget and our reserves, we've done about, I would say, 45 that have received funding in an amount of about $30 million since 2018 to today. And that's the way we were able to maintain it. But unfortunately, as I spoke about the creation of this hill, since we have a group of our facilities that come in between late 50s and probably the early 70s, you have a lot of needs for that group of buildings.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
But you just said that there's an investment that's dropping off. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about that for the listeners.
So the existing debt that we've had for a number of years had to do with the Anthony Wayne Middle School and the construction of that. I believe it's about 2004 we started that project. So you have that debt and that falls off. So we roughly have a remaining payment of about $116 per average assessed value, which will then basically end this year and would be replaced by the new referendum that's in front of voters on March 12th, would then replace it which is roughly 254 net, the total cost of 370. So if I could use an example for a family buys a car over 5 years. As that payment ends in that fifth year, the family would decide to buy a new car with a new loan. So you go from one payment per month to a new payment with the new car. So that's the way it would impact a family budget.
So let's get down to it. Ms. Moffitt, what would the average homeowner be asked to contribute for these school repairs and improvements?
So this new investment, which is before the voters on March 12th, would cost the average homeowner about $370 per year. That's after the $39 million in state aid is factored in. The net increase would be less than that. So let me just go through that. So for a home assessed in Wayne, the current tax debt that it will be dropping off, you heard me from the prior questions, dropping off is about 116. So when you take that 116, subtract it from the 370, you get to a net figure of about $254 a year. That's the impact. Now you have to remember these are property taxes, and property taxes support not only municipal services like the police department, fire department, but what many homeowners, when they're shopping for a home, is really high on the list is the quality of education. So the property tax, that increase, supports that quality of education over time.
So, Mr. Moffitt, I know from visiting parent groups and speaking to people in the community, there's a lot of questions about assessed value versus market value of houses. Maybe we could talk about that. We've spoken about assessed value. What's that? How's it different from what someone thinks about their house and what it might sell for on the open market?
So assessed values are calculated by the municipality and the county to come up with your property tax bill. So let's talk a little bit more about assessed values. So as I mentioned, the 370 earlier, that is based on the average assessed property in town, and that is 229,473, and that's how the 370 is calculated. But if you look at the slide that we have 3 houses identified that are currently on the market, you can see the difference between a market value, which is something it may sell for, and the assessed value. Again, these are values that are calculated by the municipality and potentially adjusted by the county. But if you look at the very bottom, it says estimated annual net impact of the new referendum if passed. So you go from the $415,000 market on newer pumped and turnpike property, which is assessed at $139,000 roughly, and you go all the way back up to the Alps Road property, which is at $779,000, and that's assessed at $286. So you can see a disparity on what people might think is the market rate as opposed to what they think the assessed value is. So there is a difference. So what you can do if you're interested, and I would definitely encourage everybody to check their own homes and see what it's assessed at. And you can go to a couple places. One is you can go to NewJerseyPropertyRecords.com and enter your address. Under the heading Public Records, you can see it and you can calculate and find out what your assessed value. That's one way to do it. You can also go to our website, which is wayneschools.com/future for the funding page. So you look at the top and there, you click on the funding page and there's a link for a property record database and a chart to show what tax impact would be in your assessment level. So you can look at all those resources.
Okay, Mr. Moffitt, let's get to a more difficult question. What happens if the referendum fails? That affect the tax rate?
Well, it's difficult, right? Much of the work that we have identified needs to get done, right? So if it doesn't get funded through the referendum, then we have to continue to utilize our operating budget and reserves to try to keep up with it. Again, it's about climbing that mountain I discussed earlier. And we would lose the opportunity to leverage our spending for state aid that potentially could go away over time. And the fact that if it were defeated and we would have to go back out a second or third time, that door may actually close for us. So it would be a strain on the budget overall. But again, you have to remember that aid from the state of New Jersey, again, these are all funds that state of New Jersey residents pay into, and this program is available to us today. That aid would not be captured because we wouldn't have approved the bond referendum. And again, this is money that's set aside in a program that if we don't get that funding, then another district's going to step up and receive it over time, right? The no vote for the taxes for school, the existing debt would fall off. So the impact that would be eliminated, that would fall off, it wouldn't be replaced. So you wouldn't have that softening of an impact over the investment cycle, right? So as we try to maintain our facilities, there would be no gap. You would just see a trend rather than a dip in your tax bill and then a sharp increase over the next few years. Again, there's no guarantee it's going to be passed in the future. But again, that's $116 per year on the assessed home in Wayne, and that's less than $10 a month. So the idea would be to maintain that investment level and continue on with this referendum, basically by approving it. But I talk about the operating budget and not having funds to pay for this mountain of deferred maintenance and repair projects. It would just strain not only the operating budget with repairs to roofing, plumbing, HVAC and ventilation, bleachers. That all will have to be maintained and improved over time without state aid. So you wouldn't be able to leverage our dollars to get additional funding. It would also be strained in inefficiencies, right? So we don't upgrade our windows, it's heat loss. We have to spend more money and fuel to heat our buildings. So that's an impact, that's a strain. And then we have the other strain, which is children, right? So you have existing rooms accepting additional students beyond capacity by the New Jersey standards. So you'd have higher class sizes over time, again, with the idea that as these new residential developments come online, they will generate students that will be sent to our schools. So we'll have to absorb them. And the few that were looked at as a significant impact on the student enrollment at each individual elementary school in that side of town. So if I can return to something I mentioned earlier, it has to do with considering a referendum at a different time and why is now a good time. Right now, this referendum has been approved by the Department of Education and the SDA, and we're ready to go forward and fund improvements and repairs to our buildings and expand on the site. To think that we can defer this into the future consideration, there's no guarantees. But what I do know is something in front of us is ready to go and be considered. There's no guarantees. And I look at a recent example at Beckton Regional. They went out in 2022, March, and then they took 2 years to come back. What that 2 years really means for me as a business person is I have to go back to the Department of Education, get all of my budgets reworked. I have to get up-to-date cost estimates. Over time, things can increase or change. So I have to go through a whole process over again, spend more money on professionals with the idea that there is no guarantee that in the future, a year, 2 years out, that's even going to be approved by the voters. So for me, right now, we need to consider what's in front of the voters on March 12th.
It's time to wrap up our podcast for today. Leaving the audience, what I'd like to do is ask you, how can residents see the extent of the proposed improvements at our 15 schools and see what their net tax contributions would be?
The best place to do that is at our website, wayneschools.com/future. If you look at the website, that particular page, there's an improvement tab and a funding tab. So you can hit improvements. So you can see a school by school list of facility improvements. On the funding webpage, you'll see a link of the assessed value, which will bring you to a database where you can calculate your assessed value. And all importantly, a voting page is there if you need to find your voting location.
Thank you, Mr. Moffitt, for being our guest today and shedding some light on the finances behind our upcoming referendum. For everyone listening, please take a moment to access all of the links and resources for today's episode, which can be found in the show notes. Reminder that March 12th is the day of the referendum vote here in Wayne. Thank you to all of our listeners for taking time to educate yourselves and to be informed voters.
Let's continue to work together, keeping our community informed. Thank you for being part of this conversation as we learn together about the proposal to strengthen the future of Wayne Township Public Schools.